Hello and welcome to our next speaker, Andy Marchant from Tomtom. Andy, welcome to the Future of Mobility.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me.
That's great. Great to have you. We're going to talk about your actual role that you do within Tomtom, but just for the members of our audience who aren't perhaps aware of exactly what you do, could you perhaps give us a bit of an overview of the company?
Sure. Yeah. So Tomtom is 30 years old this year. We've just had our big celebration, and was founded in the Netherlands by a group of entrepreneurs who are still the founders of the business, still involved on a day-to-day basis. And the company brought to market the first navigation device for cars. I'm sure some people will have seen it. It was the first of its kind. It was a little box that you put on your dashboard or in your windscreen. It had a map that moved on the screen, and it gave you directions of turn left, turn right. And at the time, the only way you could get that kind of technology was on very high-end cars with very, very high-end prices. And this was revolutionary, and it brought it more to the mass markets.
Wow. And I guess the company's obviously evolved in that time. We're all used to having, navigation on our smartphones. Most cars say having that. How has the company changed? Are you now working with car manufacturers?
So yeah, the company's evolved over time, as you would expect. 30 years is a long time. And where the company came from as a hardware manufacturer, the company's now transitioned from majority hardware to now majority software. So we still build hardware and we still build these devices, and we sell a lot of them every single year. However, as you rightly say, technology changes. Our same product is available on a mobile phone. So we have an app or apps that are available to users to get exactly the same experience, but just on a phone. We work with a lot of big brands around the world. I'm sure many people in your audience today, either themselves or their family, have Apple phones, for example. Apple Maps is based on TomTom. So a lot of our data sits inside the Apple Map to get people to the right location. If people have taken an Uber, it's TomTom Maps that gets that ride to you at the right location. And we also work with a lot of car brands and car manufacturers. So whilst you get your navigation in the dash, what is behind that is TomTom data, giving you the traffic information as well as the map information.
Wow. So obviously with the world changing and construction and roads and motorways being built obviously every day, how do you guys keep on top of that? How do you guys know what's happening in terms of new roads?
So there's a lot of different ways, and we don't just rely on one source. We have a fusion of different sources that give us this information, and primarily we use something called probe. And a probe is any device that is using our data and is connected to our network that is moving. And that device can be a car, it can be a phone, it can be a number of different devices. But ultimately, that probe shows us what's happening on the ground, and we can see where that probe is moving, at what speed it's moving, and we can match that to data we already know. So let me give you an example. If we know that on the road between city A and city B, the traffic in the morning would normally run at 30 miles per hour or 50 kilometers per hour. And when we look at that map, everything is running at 20 kilometers an hour or 10 miles per hour, then we know that there's a problem, and we know that there's traffic, and we know that the journey is going to be delayed. And that probe information tells us that very, very quickly. We can also use that information to see where cars are driving, but we don't expect them to. So maybe there's cars moving in a place where we don't believe there's a road. And again, dependent on the volume and the number of those cars, the systems that we have will either automatically update the map, or it will raise a question to an editor to say, hey, there's some cars here. We think it's a field. There's obviously more than a field there. We need to update it. Now, all of this data comes from around 650 million devices around the globe. So it's a huge amount of data that comes in. But I think one really important thing in today's kind of society with data and the internet is all of that data is completely anonymized. We don't know who it is. We don't know where it's from. We don't know what they're doing. All we know is there's a device with a GPS signal that is telling us what it's doing. Other than that, we have no other connection to it.
Wow. So how many countries do you operate in?
So our map today covers more than 200 countries and territories, and it's really a global map. Of course, there are some countries where we have enormous amounts of coverage. Think of Western European countries, the US, places like that. In other areas where there are less customers, there are less car drivers, there are less users, places like Central Africa, we will have still coverage, but to less detail. So you would still be able to navigate and drive between major towns and cities. But perhaps once you get into those, we don't have every neighborhood road, let's say. Right. Whereas, if you drove in a city like London or New York or San Francisco, we would have a lot more data available in those countries.
Right. Wow. So tell me about your role within TomTom, and I'd like to perhaps, after you've explained what you do, maybe talk about your team and the people that you work with, and then perhaps look at the wider roles within TomTom, because we've got a lot of students joining us who are thinking about their careers, perhaps in several years' time, thinking about whether they're going to go to college or university, and obviously a lot of them will be very passionate about the STEM subjects. So can we perhaps talk about your role to start with in your team?
Yeah. So in my role, we set up the team a couple of years ago, and the goal really of the team was we're storytellers, right? So we are part of the marketing agency within TomTom. So we're charged with delivering the narrative, the story that our users and our customers need to understand to appreciate the products that are available. And we can provide numbers. Like I said to you earlier, we have 200 countries and territories, and that's a big number. And you can tell somebody that, and you can say we've got over 70 million kilometers of roads, and we've got this 500 million addresses and these numbers are really big and are quite impressive, but they're not visual. And so we set up something called the Visualization Lab, and our goal was to try and turn our data into something that people could understand. Because if I tell you that we make data, what does that mean? It's very, very hard. You can't touch it. It's not tangible. So we set about creating a team that could turn the data into something people could understand. It's almost like an art form. And a lot of the people that work in the team are designers. We have engineers as well. But a lot of it is more around graphical design. So how do you show somebody that you've taken 600 million moving devices? What does that look like within a city? How do they move? Where do they move? And quickly we were able to really kind of give our product and our data a visual feel and a visual look that people could really start to understand. So when I say that, we update this many kilometers of road every single day, let's show that on a global map, and you can really start to see the heat map and the colors change as the world moves and improves. And we like to think of it a little bit like the human body, and at the core, the database is the heart, and that's what's constantly beating and pushing out the data and receiving data in. And the data that moves around are like the veins in your body, and it's the blood that flows through. So it's constantly moving, it constantly changes, nothing stands still. And that's how we try and kind of visualize it, that we give it a life, give it some kind of identity.
Sure. So you mentioned about designers within your team. What other roles are there that you guys rely on in order to get that data? I mean, it's interesting to say about graphic designers, because I'm sure a lot of the students will be focusing on that and I guess ordinarily your mindset would go, well, maybe I'll become a web designer or so it's interesting that perhaps people wouldn't ordinarily think of contacting TomTom if they're interested in graphic design.
Yeah. No, I think graphic designers, web designers, as you say, are all important, and they're what can bring. Their role is what can bring the story to life.
Sure.
Before you even get to that stage, though, you've got to be able to understand what the data is, how to work with it, how to extract the information that you need. So for that, we have software engineers, and software engineers know what the data does, and they know how to link data together so you can get the right level of information. We also have data scientists, and data scientists look at how to put different tools and ways of working in place. So we use a lot of artificial intelligence. We use a lot of machine learning, and that also because of the volumes of data we're talking about, and we're talking about huge amounts of data. And we once did a calculation that if you for example, if you laid all of our traffic end to end, you could circumnavigate the Earth every 1.5 seconds or something like that. It's absolutely it's mind blowing.
Wow.
And obviously, to be able to process this data, you need automation.
Yeah.
So data scientists and software engineers can devise the processes and the tools needed so that the machine can do a lot of the work itself, and you don't need lots of editors and engineers to manually work on this. So I would say, designers are kind of the tip of the spear, because they're the ones that turn it into what the user wants to see. But behind that, there's a lot of kind of highly skilled engineers and architects and data scientists that really kind of work on the data before it even gets to a designer's desk.
Sure. Yeah. Fantastic. So looking at your journey when you started out, they always say people at kind of our age, like, you'll never end up doing what you planned to do when you started, et cetera, et cetera. So what were your thoughts? You obviously went through college. So I'm guessing you went to university.
I didn't. No, I didn't go to university. I had one goal when I left school, and that was to be a policeman.
No, right.
And,
okay.
That was my one goal, and unfortunately, it didn't happen through a number of different factors. And I guess with a lot of people, you fall into a role, eventually. So having qualifications, etc., like you said, doesn't necessarily mean you will end up in that area. I went through school, I went through further education, but didn't go to the route of university. But when I was at school, geography was a huge interest and a subject I really enjoyed. I'm one of those people that when I get on a plane, I can sit for a long time just staring out the window when you fly over landmass just to find places and look at the way valleys are and hills are and mountains are. And I love flying over, the Alps. I was fortunate if I lived in the Alps for about 5 or 6 years. And every time I fly over there, I can recognize places and I can connect them via different roads and valleys. And it's something that's always interested me. And I think that's then, by having an interest in geography, then, working for somebody like TomTom, where it is all about location, which is ultimately geography, has an association or an affinity.
Brilliant. So I can sense your excitement about your role, and I can see you're very passionate about it. But what were the things that gets you out of bed in the morning, that gets you interested in getting involved in TomTom? What excites you about it?
I think it's just that no 2 days are the same. So the world around us changes, right? Everything changes. Just think about what you see on your daily commute to work, on the way to school, at the weekend. Everything changes. I think that's the exciting thing is, we see so many things happening in the world. Look at what's happened in the last 2 years. We were very, very quickly able to look at the data and see very, very quickly, almost to the day, when traffic stopped moving.
Wow.
We were able to publish imagery and numbers that really showed that in countries in Italy, which were some of the first countries to start to restrict movement because of coronavirus, overnight traffic dropped by over 80%. That was just overnight, and it really flattened and was very, very low for a long time. And as governments around the world started to implement similar measures, we could track that through traffic, and we could see the roads just became so quiet overnight in country after country after country. It was almost like looking at a global map and seeing the lights go out. Wow. That's how significant it was. And I think it's things like that you say, well, the data that we have is so powerful and can tell so many stories to so many people, but for different reasons.
Sure.
All of our users use our data for multiple reasons, not only to drive their car and understand where they're going, but a government or a city can use the data to understand what happens if I close this road for roadworks. Where's all the traffic going to go? If I want to close this road, what's the best time and the best day to do so that has the minimal impact on people's journeys? Right. And I think it's the fact that all of that data is used in such a variety of ways that kind of energizes you really to kind of look at more ways and more use cases and think about how you can tell people the same story.
Wow. So you're joining us today from the Netherlands, which I believe is where your head office is in Amsterdam. So thank you very much. I appreciate you've probably got a busy schedule. So with regards to sort of the numbers of employees within the organisation, obviously you clearly started with no doubt 3 people 30 years ago. What sort of numbers do you have now?
It's around about 5,000 employees around the world, and divided between offices around the world. They stretch from California on the West Coast in the USA, right the way across to China, to Shanghai, to Australia, wow. The Middle East. We have a very, very big engineering team based in India, another one based in Poland, and in between a lot of regional teams that have knowledge on regional nuances and regional requirements. And then we have, here in Amsterdam, for example, we have engineers, but we also have a lot of the corporate functions, finance, HR and marketing and sales. A lot of those are based here.
Wow. So finally, one question, which I guess is perhaps a little bit difficult to answer in some respects. Obviously, this conference is all about the future of mobility and obviously up-to-date things that are happening now, but where do we see ourselves in 5, 10, 15 years' time? What are your thoughts with regards to TomTom and its application moving forward?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things we see today will evolve in the coming years. I think electrification is one huge area. So electric vehicles. Okay, yeah. So I think that's one area that we're going to see consistently change and consistently evolve. And as more adoption and people buy more electric vehicles, then the networks have to get bigger. At the moment, people buying electric vehicles often have this thing that has been known as range anxiety. Sure. And if you drive your normal car and your orange light comes on to say you're low on fuel, you've got around 50 miles left in the tank. Yeah. Especially in the UK, we're British. You can find a petrol station within a few minutes, pretty much anywhere in the UK. Yeah. And within 2 or 3 minutes, you're back up to full tank and you're off again. If your electric car brings that light on, there aren't as many charging points as there are fuel stations. Sure. It takes longer to charge a car than it does to fuel up a car. Yeah. So I think there's this thing called range anxiety that people don't want to run out of power, because if you run out of power completely, everything's dead inside the car. So a lot of the work that we do is in the navigation side, is making sure that people can get to where they need to get and charge at the right points. Yeah. So we have within our navigation, we have ways that people can see their range for their vehicle, and within that range, we will tell them where we suggest that they pull off and charge their cars, because the data that we have also tells us which charging stations have availability and which ones are busy. So what we don't want to do is say to you, hey, Richard, come off at the next junction of the highway and you can plug your car in. And when you drive in there, there's 10 other cars in front of you and there's no space. We'd much rather say drive another 5 miles, 5 kilometers, because, and take a longer diversion, because we know that there's a space there available and you'll be able to charge your car. So I think the electrification side is a big area. The other big area is automation. And I think everybody's heard now about self-driving cars. When you and I were younger, it was more science fiction, and now it's more fact. Self-driving cars are already there. We see brands like Tesla in the market, but they're perhaps not to the level that people dreamt about. So your car can drive itself while you're sat behind the wheel, a little bit like cruise control, but a little bit further. It can change lanes by itself, etc. But it's still going to look like a car. I think further down the line, and maybe this is beyond 5 to 10 years, cars of the future, you will no longer be the driver, but be a passenger, because does the car even need a steering wheel? Because if it is all pre-programmed and it can move itself, then you have no need to take control of the car. That's much, much further down the line. But I think in between, you'll start to see the self-driving car get smarter as it learns more. And it's like a computer and machine learning. As it starts to learn more about what it can and can't do, it can automate itself a little bit more in that process. So I think those are the two areas that are going to be the biggest areas, but I think probably electrification in the first part, and then as that becomes more adopted and more ubiquitous, I think the self-driving element will then start to expand and accelerate as well.
Wow, thank you. Well, Andy, thank you so much. As I say, I know you're working hard at head office in the Netherlands, so I appreciate your time today, and thanks for joining us.
No, thank you, and wish everybody a great day.